The Haunted Graveyard. The town of Black Hollow was a quiet, forgotten place nestled deep in the countryside, its single claim to notoriety being Hollow's Rest, a sprawling graveyard that stretched for miles beyond the outskirts. Encased by wrought iron fences and shrouded in perpetual mist, Hollow's Rest was steeped in sinister folklore. For generations, the townsfolk whispered tales of the graveyard's dark past. Shadowy figures wandering the rows of tombstones, spectral lights hovering above unmarked graves, and most chilling of all, bodies that refused to stay buried. It's cursed, the elders would warn. Once you enter, the dead mark you as one of their own. Most people avoided the graveyard, but as a thrill-seeking amateur filmmaker, I couldn't resist its macabre allure. My plan was simple: spend the night in Hollow's Rest and document the experience for my YouTube channel, Urban Dread Chronicles. If only I had known what awaited me. The night I chose was particularly gloomy. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the chill in the air seeped into my bones. Armed with my camera, a flashlight, and a flimsy sense of courage, I made my way through the creaking gate of Hollow's Rest. The graveyard was eerily silent. No chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, unnatural stillness. The air smelled of damp earth and decay. Rows of weathered tombstones stretched endlessly, their inscriptions barely legible under centuries of moss. Perfect atmosphere, I muttered to myself, trying to mask my growing unease. I began filming, narrating in hushed tones as I explored the graveyard. My flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, revealing crumbling statues of angels with cracked faces and mausoleums with rusted gates. Then I heard it, a faint rustling sound behind me. I spun around, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam landed on an old, leaning tombstone. Nothing. Probably just an animal, I whispered, though my voice betrayed my fear. But as I turned back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure stood about 20 feet away, partially obscured by mist. It was tall and gaunt, its face pale and hollow-eyed. It wore tattered funeral clothes, the kind you'd expect to see in an open casket. My first instinct was to rationalize it. Maybe it's a homeless person, I thought. But then it moved, jerky, unnatural, as though its limbs were being pulled by invisible strings. I stumbled backward, dropping my camera. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. I retrieved my camera and decided to keep moving. Just nerves, I told myself. Nothing to be afraid of. But the graveyard had other plans. As I wandered deeper into Hollow's Rest, the air grew colder, and a strange sensation settled over me, like I was being watched. The rustling sounds grew more frequent, accompanied by faint whispers that seemed to come from every direction. Help us. Join us. The voices were soft but insistent, like the wind carrying the pleas of the damned. My flashlight began to flicker, casting erratic shadows across the tombstones. In one brief flash, I saw them, figures rising from the graves. Their skeletal hands clawed at the dirt, their sunken eyes fixed on me. Panic took over. I ran blindly through the maze of tombstones, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, mingling with guttural moans and the sickening sound of earth being disturbed. I stumbled upon a mausoleum, its stone door slightly ajar. Desperate for refuge, I slipped inside and slammed the door shut behind me. The interior was cold and damp, the air thick with the stench of mildew and rot. My flashlight illuminated rows of stone coffins, their lids covered in dust and cobwebs. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but then I noticed the inscriptions on the walls, strange symbols carved into the stone, glowing faintly in the darkness. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what they were: binding runes. The mausoleum wasn't just a tomb, it was a prison, and whatever it had been built to contain was waking up. The ground beneath me began to tremble. Dust rained down from the ceiling as one of the stone coffins slid open with a deafening scrape. From within emerged a figure unlike any I had seen before. It was tall and emaciated, its flesh stretched tightly over its bones. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and its hands ended in long, jagged claws. It spoke, its voice a deep, guttural rasp that seemed to echo inside my skull. "You dare disturb the resting place of the damned?" I was too terrified to respond. The creature stepped closer, its movements deliberate and predatory. "You do not belong here," it hissed. "But now that you've entered, you will never leave." As if summoned by the creature's words, the whispers outside the mausoleum erupted into a cacophony of wails and shrieks. Through a crack in the door, I saw them, dozens of figures emerging from the ground, their decayed bodies shambling toward the mausoleum. The keeper turned its glowing eyes toward me. "You will join them," it said, raising a clawed hand. I did the only thing I could think of. I bolted for the door. The graveyard was alive with the dead. Everywhere I turned, skeletal hands reached for me, and hollow eyes burned with hatred. The whispers had turned into screams, each one a testament to the suffering of those trapped in Hollow's Rest. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing near a massive, gnarled tree at the center of the graveyard. Its twisted branches loomed like the arms of some ancient, malevolent being. At its base was a plaque. "Here lies the soul of the first gravedigger, cursed to tend to the dead for eternity." Before I could process the meaning, the keeper emerged from the shadows, flanked by an army of the undead. "You cannot escape," it said. Desperation gave me strength. I remembered the binding runes in the mausoleum and realized they were the key. If I could replicate them, perhaps I could trap the keeper and its horde once more. Using a jagged rock, I began carving the symbols into the dirt around the tree, my hands shaking as the creatures closed in. The keeper lunged at me just as I completed the final rune. There was a blinding flash of light, followed by a deafening roar. When I opened my eyes, the graveyard was silent. The figures were gone, and the keeper was nowhere to be seen. I stumbled out of Hollow's Rest as dawn broke, my body battered and my mind shattered. The footage on my camera was corrupted, the audio filled with static and distorted whispers. No one believed my story, but I knew the truth. Hollow's Rest wasn't just a graveyard. It was a doorway to something far worse. And one day, it will open again,